Where's Roger? Phil, should we begin or? Yep, begin? Okay. Okay, so we're going to begin. Everybody come in, settle down to our rock star panel. I am thrilled to be asked by Roger to moderate this panel. It was a true honor that he asked me. It puts me in the position that I've spent my lifetime doing, which is interviewing people, but in this case also interviewing men. So I'm thrilled to do it. We have spent the last couple days together. Actually, it's only been one day, but it's felt like it's felt good. And we've had a meal together, and we've talked this close, you know, our faces are this close, talking. So I've gotten to get a sense of them, and I'm so excited to hear what they have to say. And they're going to tell you a thick story not only about them, but about what it means to be human, and what gets in the way of our humanity, and how do we solve our own problems. But personal stories always do that. So when you listen to their stories, I don't want you to think of them as other. I want you to think of them as you. So what they share with you are bits of wisdom for your own life. And so I want you to resonate from that space about what they teach you about you and what gets in the way and how you can solve your own problems. Okay, so we have Mandar Ape, the extraordinary, as I call him. Mandar worked at Shell for nearly 2 decades in Houston. I'm a New Yorker. And produced a documentary film, From India with Love. It's this extraordinary film. I want you to check it out. It's called From India with Love. It's a beautiful film, where he hosted the parents from Sandy Hook and a former gang member from LA on a journey to India. As a mediator for 2 decades, Mandar found his calling while teaching mediation to former gang members and LAPD police officers. Currently, he manages Cities for Peace, an initiative that promotes peace and social cohesion, making a difference so far to communities in LA County, Washington, D.C., Minneapolis, Seattle, Cape Town, and many others around the world. Phillip Rock Lester, he likes to be called Rock, is a native of, he's the one on the gentleman on the end of the line. Rock is a native of South Central Los Angeles, as a community advocate and organizer with experience in entrepreneurial training, youth development, policy change, and community intervention. And I had the extraordinary experience this morning of hearing his wisdom in response to a conversation we were having, and it was mind-blowing, so I'm super excited to hear from Rock. Rock is the oldest of 9 children. He grew up in a single-headed household led by his mother on the west side in South Central LA. At the age of 14, Rock lost his uncle to gun violence and was a victim himself of that same gun violence. Battling with trauma and loss, Rock found himself making a series of bad decisions which resulted in him being tried as an adult at the age of 16 in a criminal court of law. Post his incarceration, Rock began reevaluating gang culture, poverty, the judicial system, his life experience, and the connection between all of them, and ended up becoming an advocate for survivors of crime, youth development, and system change. Working with organizations such as the Anti-Recidivism Coalition, the Reverence Project, Future IDs, Youth Justice Coalition, and Time Done, Lester has helped change the narrative and shift resources to programs that reflect the needs in underserved and traumatized communities. And change the narrative, I want you to hear that as a code phrase for telling a thicker story, okay? So changing the narrative is starting from a new place. Okay, Gilbert Johnson, he's the one closest to me. He's a native of South Central Los Angeles and has over a decade of experience in community organizing and engagement, policy change, and peace-building work. He was a foster youth who grew up in poverty with, as he says, a quote-unquote dysfunctional family, which led him toward a path of trouble, drug and alcohol addiction, gang involvement, homelessness, and incarceration. Gilbert was first put on probation at the age of 16 after expulsion from high school. He cycled in and out of jail until the age of 26, when he was introduced to a social justice nonprofit in the heart of South Central called Community Coalition. Sorry, I didn't read that sentence correctly. He cycled in and out of jail until the age of 26, when he was introduced to a social justice nonprofit in the heart of South Central. With his, coupled with his faith and determination, this organization changed and saved his life. And he wrote this last sentence because it's so important to him and it so reflects who he is as a person and as a man. He said, put in there that after that, I got married and had 6 beautiful children, Joshua, Josiah, Jacob, Jada, Jonathan, and Gianna. And he said, don't, and I said, do you want me to include all the kids? He's like, yeah, I got to get the kids in there because that's an important part of who I am, right? So his faith, so I'm going to rephrase the last sentence, okay? His faith, determination, and social justice work led him to love himself and thus love others. So I'm super thrilled for this conversation. I should tell you the organization, just so you know. We're going to start with Mandar, then we're going to go with Rock, then we're going to go with Gilbert. They'll each speak a little bit. Then I'll have a few questions, and then we'll open it up for questions from the audience. And this will be fun.
Can you hear me? So like she said, I spent nearly 2 decades in a small oil company called Shell. I used to live in Houston. My title at Shell was Game Changer. I used to manage a multi-million-dollar fund, travel 200 days a year, so cosmopolitan by design. I was attacked by a mob in Nigeria when I was on my first assignment as a petroleum engineer in the rural communities of Nigeria. And those experiences don't leave you. I had nothing to do with that Niger Delta issue. I was just a young petroleum engineer. And a whole village came after me with swords and sticks and stones, and I barely escaped. Fast forward, as a game changer, I started thinking, can companies like Shell invest in communities where there is violence and find a business case? So not just philanthropic donations. And when your heart is in a good place, when your intention is pure and clean, the universe helps you, has been my experience. So I actually found a business case. And I invested Shell Game Changer money in a technology called deliberative polling, deliberative democracy. That world of violence is where I found my calling. Because violence can happen anytime. It can happen anywhere. It can happen whether you live in a gated community or whether you live in the slums of Mumbai. It's something that happens at 3 levels, I feel. At the level of action, at the level of speech, and at the level of thoughts and feelings. So that is where I started applying my meditation practices. So I've been a meditation teacher. I've studied meditation, practiced, and taught for the last 21 years. I've never missed a single day. And I started thinking, where can I integrate this? And the best place to do it is places where there is a divide, where there is people who don't come seemingly to hang out with each other. And so that is where I made a film. It's called From India with Love. That took me on my own journey of finding my own roots in India. That we were a very colonized country. And we never decolonized our mind. So when I started learning about the ancient traditions and culture, I started seeing that it's socially still relevant. And so that work took me to South Central. And I landed in South Central LA when Nipsey Hussle was sadly murdered. That's the time when I entered South Central LA. And I met so many of these former gang members, community members, and I realized that there is a lot of trauma here. And that is where I applied myself. I actually found myself. Anybody I met there, I felt they are traumatized, whether it's a 6-year-old or an 80-year-old. So what I did was I brought all these diverse people, seemingly diverse people, but they had one thing in common, right? They were all traumatized. So I'm going to show you a 3-minute video of my work. Let the work speak for itself. The bottom line is, if I can do it, anybody can do it. If we can do it in South Central, we can do it anywhere in the world. You can play now, Phillip.
Breathe in, you go up. When you breathe out, let go.
Inside this room in South LA, the simple act of breathing is connecting an unlikely group of people in a way even they never thought possible.
When it first started, I thought he was crazy.
Day one, I got out of the car and I saw Chief Cato, and I'm like, oh snap, the police.
A bit skeptical, something different.
Officers, former gang members, LA residents who admit they had a negative view of police now look forward to these moments when they can get together to just breathe.
We're all human and we're all trying to walk this earth, trying to find answers and trying to live a better life.
The man connecting this unlikely group, Mandar Ape with Cities for Peace.
It has to start somewhere.
Ape and his program promote non-violence in a notoriously violent place, South LA. And that is why Ape picked this area to introduce deep breathing, meditation, and yoga.
If LA can become the change, then it creates a ripple effect.
At first, these people were skeptical, but eventually, all of that floated away, and they became believers.
It helped me a lot. With this exercise, we can come together as a community and, God, make it better.
It works. It got me to live in the now. It's a peaceful place.
These exercises arm everyone here with compassion, empathy, and self-control.
The breathing was good because it taught me how to relax and how to be with one within my body, mind, and soul.
If I can control my breathing, I can control my thoughts, therefore I can control my actions.
That includes officers out on calls
We've seen the good, the bad, and the ugly.
who have to arrest people.
We're a little bit more understanding in terms of how they feel.
This group quickly realized not only did breathing connect them, but so did their passion, commitment, and desire to make Los Angeles a safer place.
The connection, the understanding, how we're all human, and how if we think peace, we can be peace.
Something so simple, creating bonds, forging friendships.
I was able to see past the uniform and see them as human beings, and I would like to think from the experience that they were able to see me in the same light.
Everybody was comfortable, we were hugging, and I will continue to do it.
The mastermind giving all the credit to the people who are willing to try. He calls this a beautiful experiment and says this is just the beginning.
An avalanche of peace and love. Because non-violence is simply love.
Adrian Arambulo for Life Connected.
This group has also done yoga and painted murals together as forms of practicing nonviolence. The program Cities for Peace hopes this will have a ripple effect on other cities, and they're willing to try.
Question.
Why don't you just tell us about, it says here on our notes, speak from your heart. Oh, sorry. I think what we want to hear from you is what do you want to share with us about your own past, your present, as it relates to the issues of the conference. So we have on our notes, speak from your heart, and I say, speak from your heart.
Got it. So just I'm just looking at the video that Mandar have there, showing the practices of the breathing exercises and other techniques that he brought to the community for folks who are kind of like doing the work. So some of the people that you guys seen in those videos are people who are kind of like doing something that's kind of like what we call like community-based public safety, or like grid work, which is gang reduction and youth development. So a lot of times they're dealing with a lot of heavy stuff. They're responding. They're also considered to be like first responders. So they're responding to situations to where there's crime scenes and people who have lost their lives, et cetera, right? And they're there to kind of like calm families, find out the real information, and really kind of like slow like rumors. A lot of times what happens in communities like where we come from is it'd be a lot of rumors and people come to conclusions. If somebody got, areas is kind of like big. If somebody may have got shot over here, we conclude that it happened from over there, right? It might be something totally like unconnected. So what happened is a lot of times these people, they're there to kind of provide services, and these are individuals who are former members, et cetera, who have relationships with the communities that folks kind of like trust in, right? And a lot of times they don't have like healing. Like, so they're doing like a lot of the healing and treating folks, but not actually getting kind of like addressing like their own traumas and dealing with these situations. So I might respond to one situation, somebody else might respond to 5 or 6 situations. That is a lot that you got to deal with, right? Especially when you got families that's emotional, et cetera. So these practices that I seen that, you know, Mandar came with, that was great, it worked, right? But we was also in the process of doing things that was happening already in South Central LA, which is like our SLACSI, which is like South LA Healing Circle Initiative, to where we kind of like, a lot of times around the summer times, we get an uptick in kind of like, you know, violence, crime. A lot of people come out, a lot of things is happening. So you kind of like factor in more than just the gang thing. You factor in heat, irritation, et cetera. And sometimes these could be the drivers. And then what we have is a situation that may have not started out as a gang situation, but people involved as that. Now we got something kind of just blown. So most of the work that, you know, we do or that I kind of like do, so just to be honest with y'all, I do less of kind of like the law enforcement work. That's like not my lane. I let them folks kind of like do their thing. So we all working towards one agenda, but I work towards kind of like focusing more or less on the youth and folks who are kind of like system impacted is getting out, reentry folks who kind of like need resources and services to prevent them to being a part of the recidivism rate, perpetuating mass incarceration and stopping young folks or preventing young folks from going inside. So you have folks who do prevention, and then you have folks who do intervention. So a lot of times we're just trying to prevent, right? And what we use to kind of like prevent is tools. We use our lived experience. So it's a lot of things that I didn't have as a young person coming up that kind of like circumstances or put me in a position to do some of the things that I did. So what we try to do is provide opportunities, the opportunities that we can get, funding to make sure we have programs where young folks can benefit from, whether it's after-school programs, entrepreneurship programs, whatever, to keep people's minds like occupied and doing something positive, to give people alternatives and choices, because a lot of times like you gonna make decisions based on the choices that you have. So we just kind of like, you know, trying to expand those choices, and I'm like, that's mainly like the work that we're doing, but then also find a way and a balance for self. Some of us do this work again because of the passion and also where we done been in the past, so the objective is to prevent somebody else from going down our same lane. So kind of like in her speech, and I'm not gonna go a lot on this because some of this stuff can get kind of like, you know, emotionally caught up. When I was 14, I had some things that kind of like happened, and then prior to, but I was shot twice at 14, and then again at 15, I was shot again. Yeah, so one of the situations, like, you know, my mama and them was there. So anyway, fast forward, it's just like the work that we do is kind of like preventing young folks to being where we at. We still in South Central LA. We come from that. At one time, we was, you know, we wouldn't be sitting on the stage together, you know what I'm saying, based on the fact that we was opposing areas that's 5 minutes away. It's just like a lot, you know, a lot of trauma. So that's the kind of like the stuff that we're gonna kind of like continue to talk on later. I'm gonna let her get into the questions. Yeah. But kind of like when we here telling our stories, a lot of times it's like we're not telling it from a third party, it's first party, and we gotta relive those situations, you know what I'm saying? So that's where I get caught up.
Okay, thank you very much. And there'll be lots of time for questions, so not to worry. Go ahead.
Yeah, just want to say good afternoon, everyone, though it very much feels like morning. You know, we're 3 hours behind. But no, I want to thank the organizers of this event for allowing us to get up here and speak truth, to really speak from the heart and speak about what we know and what we've dealt with since birth in many ways. So I want to thank you, Rock, for being vulnerable, sharing your experiences, and it's all right to cry, it's all right to let it go. Many times in our community we taught not to cry. We bottle it up, and that bottled up anger turns into violence. And what I've learned in this work is that violence begets violence, poverty begets poverty, hurt people, and healed people. And we are up here, so be it. I'm with that. But we're up here because we took the time to do the healing work, the deep healing work, the deep unconditioning work that many of us as black men, brown men growing up in South Central and dealing with historical disinvestment, our communities being overlooked, our schools being the poorest performing schools. You know, the CIA brought in crack cocaine many years ago, and my mother and father were both crack addicts. So that's how I ended up in the system, foster care, so much issues growing up. When I mentioned dysfunctional family, I mean, all of my uncles and aunties were alcoholics and drug addicts, you know, from grandmother down, right? And so quite naturally, at the age of 13, I began smoking and drinking and doing drugs and just engaging in activities that really kind of was fostered and socially engineered in many ways. When you look at the ways that systemic racism has played a role in communities of color across this nation, it was by design that, you know, when black droves of black folks, tens of thousands of black folks were migrating to California to escape the grave conditions of the Jim Crow South, when my ancestors and grandmothers and great-grandmothers and grandfathers got to California, banks wouldn't allow them to buy land in a certain area. There was restrictive covenants. There was redlining. There were sundown towns. Black folks couldn't be in a certain area that were predominantly white when the sun was going down, because you might not make it home. And the police at that time were enforcing this same type of strategy. If you look back to the Watts Rebellion, I don't call it a riot because a riot is senseless violence. Our people were fed up. Our people were, you know, ready to tear some shit down, excuse my French. And that's exactly what they did. Unfortunately, it was their own community. But we didn't have any outlet. We didn't have any other options to show that we are tired of being treated inhumanely, treated with unconstitutional policing practice, treated as third world citizens, right? When we're paying taxes, we're working, you look at chattel slavery, free labor, right? All of this, and we're seeking an opportunity that we're continuously running into barriers against. And so there's a misconception about gangbanging, the current state of gangbanging, that, oh, it was always just black folks killing each other, brown folks killing each other and shooting each other and stabbing, robbing, and that's not true. The actual history of the formation of Crips and Bloods in South Central LA were community groups or like cliques, very tribal, but that got together to protect their community, to protect their people. On the east side of South Central, Raymond Washington, who started the Crips, really had this Black Panther, Black Power movement ideology that he brought his brothers together to say, we're not gonna allow what happened in Watts to happen in South Central, where the police are driving by, just bumping people up, pulling them over, jacking them up for no reason, literally no reason, driving by, pointing guns, just acting like you're gonna shoot our, like, it was a resistance and a rebellion against that type of state-sanctioned violence. And that's kind of what it grew out of. Now, when crack cocaine was introduced, that just spun everything out of control, and there became an underground market where folks could make big money off of this drug, this substance that, again, was brought into our community. And that's really where the crime and violence upticked. The original gang, Crips and Bloods, it was fighting. You might see somebody with a bat, a bike chain, rarely a knife. It was more just fisticuffs, like showing manhood, showing that you know how to fight. That's basically what it was. But the crack cocaine epidemic really turned everything upside down, and that's when the violence upticked. And so you heard Rock's story. I have family members that were murdered at the hands of the community, and it's such a common situation in South Central that we have to push these type of, like what Mandar was saying, we have to push these type of non-traditional, non-punitive strategies to really get to the root of what's causing that crime and violence. And that's really like the work that I'm doing, you know, working in the mayor's office now. I lead all the reentry work in the city of Los Angeles, and it's just amazing work that we're doing. And so I wanted to touch on those topics a little bit.
Thank you, Gilbert. Okay, so I am, there's too many questions in my head. Okay, I'm going to start with, for all three of you. Actually, I'm going to start with Rock and Gilbert first. So one of the things we've talked a lot about, that I talked a lot about in my talk too, is the hierarchy of humanness in boy culture, which some humans are seen as more human than other humans. And so it's obvious that if you're placed in a position in which you are not seen as fully human, as white people, as rich people, as, right, I mean, all these other people that are seen as more human, more worthy of a full life than you are, that it's going to produce negative outcomes. So in that, right, I mean, in terms of violence, et cetera. However, I'm really interested in your reframing it because it's super important. It's also a form of resistance to dehumanization. So the forming of tribes, I think we could be thinking about as resistance to dehumanization, but it's a resistance that's for survival rather than for liberation. You get what I'm saying? So the idea is that it's resisting, but being in a gang is not for long-term liberation, but it's for the immediate survival. So I'm curious about how you resonate with that idea, but the notion of resistance in gangs, so we can, it's definitely a negative thing, right? You're engaging in violence, et cetera. I'm not trying to do anything with making it a positive thing. What I'm saying is you said resistance, so that's interesting to me. Gangs is a form of resistance to dehumanization, but then the limitations of it. You get what I mean, Rock? The limitations of it, of resistance as forming a gang and committing violence. So I'm just curious, just riff off of whatever you want to riff off of what I said. It doesn't matter if you exactly answer what's in my head.
So I'm really trying to just like, you know, understand the question there, but I think Gilbert kind of like laid it out. So when you talk about gangs in LA and kind of like a lot of these things was started, it was really for the community, you know what I mean? So,
yeah.
And it was kind of like, you know, like that. So I'm gonna say like my grandmother, she used to be a part of Neighborhood Watch. So on a Neighborhood Watch, like, you know, I used to be with her all the time because I was the one that kind of like, you know, made her a grandmother, right? So she used to go to these Neighborhood Watch meetings, and these wasn't the older ladies. These was like, you know, middle-aged women. Like, you know, my mom was 16 when she had me, so I was with my grandmother a lot. But they kind of like, I didn't understand, but just being around them and kind of like understanding later, they did things that kind of like make the community safe, the block that we stayed on. And then people kind of like had roles. And what I used to notice is that when the police came around, the police was never like a sign of like safety. It was always something was wrong. If the police is around, like something is wrong. So they would actually go out and like meet the police, like why are y'all here? Like what's going on? But what they did, they had a structure. But you know, and a lot of times, like, you know, that structure that was there, sometimes we don't pass on. I heard somebody mention like tradition yesterday, right? And cultures. Sometimes we don't pass those traditions on. So my grandmother had to, you know, go back to work and doing what she was doing. And she worked at General Hospital, and she wound up retiring after 43 years. But when she went back to work, it wasn't like the torchlight was passed on to like her kids and other individuals up under them. Yeah. So things started happening in the community and things formed, you know what I'm saying? And people started now being as what we call gangs. Yeah. And sometimes I see like the word gang is being used to kind of like criminalize people who are part, like, you know, of the community. So, you know, everybody don't come from somewhere and just join the gang. Sometimes people are just raised up in certain communities as a result of being in this community right here. It's like, you know, it's almost like, again, it's a community, it's a family. Like, so, you know, people got to need to be a part of it, like, you know, cliques, et cetera. Yeah. But it was there basically for the prime purpose of community, keeping community safe, and also resources. So as they was doing like, you know, Neighborhood Watch, they also had one house where they did voters registration. This was your responsibility. When they had block parties to keep the community together, the neighborhood together, this was this house responsibility, right? But this was people that was in the community that was kind of like making sure that things were safe, and the whole thing was to keep the police like out of the community. Because again, we didn't see the police as a sign of safety. Like, so when you talk about, you know, Gilbert mentioned like the police in their inception, like, you know, they was slave catchers. So every time we encountered the police, it was always something negative, you know what I mean? So it was like, okay, how do we ward them off? And then you kind of like, you know, you had gangs came into play, what they call gangs, And a lot of these gangs, they took on orientations, like you said, like the Black Panther Party. You know, you always got somebody trying to start something new, right? So as they seen some of the work that the Black Panthers was doing in regards to community, building community, making sure people knew their rights in the community, et cetera, people started those things. But then afterwards, you know, there was an infiltration of the community with drugs, and the rally cry was no more freedom, justice, and equality, but now it became the drug, which brought in like a lot of like problems. So in connection with that, I think when people come from certain communities, we have like shared values. That is, like, we done things that we endeared. We done went to the same elementary school. We done went to the same junior high school. We done went to the same high school, you know what I mean? And those things kind of like bond people and keep people together. And growing up in the community, growing up in the park, growing up in the projects, whatever, people kind of like locked in there. So a lot of times I think, like, you know, gangs is definitely like a reflection of like tribes and how people feel, you know, a sense of belonging, is that they come from that community, they feel safe, they see familiar faces, etc. So, you know, the gang is more of like, you know, again, it's a community and a tribe. And like I'm gonna end this with saying again that we put labels on stuff that we don't understand, especially when we want to criminalize it or make it less or debase it. So people take their ideals and they'll turn their ideals, well, they have an attitude, they'll turn their attitude into an ideal, and then that ideal become codified into law of how they believe. So at one time, we was considered to be 3/5 of a man. That was somebody's ideal. And after that ideal and that attitude, they codified that in the law, and now we had that in the article of the Constitution. You get what I'm saying? So this is kind of like the same thing that happened with gangs. But if you come around, like Mandar was in the community, he came to South Central LA, these is people, you know what I'm saying? And they got the same objectives that everybody else have. And that's kind of like to, you know, to have a roof over their head, feed their family, and be able to take care of their day-to-day responsibilities, but just boxed in a certain type of conditions to where they don't have the resources that everybody else kind of like may have. So they kind of like, you know, they're trying to make ends meet, or as they say in the community, like, get it how you live, right? What the opportunities is there. So if you don't have the opportunity to do the right thing, the only thing is there is the wrong thing, or to play the hand of the cards that you was dealt.
Yeah, okay. That was just so deep and profound. And so he disrupted a couple things in the way I asked the question. Did you hear that? All you teenagers in the room? He disrupted something. First of all, he disrupted, I assumed that when he was part of something, a group that did something negative, that was resistance, that seemed negative by its label of gang, that was resistance for survival. And he said, no, it started off actually as community building. It was resistance for liberation, the forming of groups. And then he disrupted the term gang. Because do you remember what he said? He said the gang, basically, when you put a gang, that's a label on it that gives it a negative thing. It was a tribe. We don't think of tribes as negative, as we saw in this conference, necessarily. And certainly tribes can do bad things, as we all know. So you disrupted the language and then the framework. And it's interesting to me because the roots of forming groups and communities, it's so obvious that it would start from communities, right? But you reminded us of that, so thank you for that. Go ahead, Gilbert.
I know your question was in reference to rebellion, and it took me back to a trip I had in Ghana. There's a group of formerly incarcerated black men in California called the Black Man Maroon Space. And when I went to Ghana, I had some knowledge through westernized education about the history of my ancestors and some knowledge of rebellion, but it wasn't like being in the motherland and actually speaking with people who had ancestors that lived through the rebellion of colonization. And land acquisition and just terror in Africa. And so one thing I learned is that when an African nation or tribe would, conquer another tribe, it wasn't about murdering their entire tribe. It wasn't about just wiping out their culture. They actually allowed assimilation. They allowed African folks or other tribes to continue their cultural practices, to continue to practice their religion, continue to eat their foods and things of that nature. And I think like black folks are some of the most communal people on this earth. You know, in South Central, we don't ostracize anybody. Like in many ways, you know, black and brown folks get along greatly. There's a stigma and there's a conversation where a lot of brown folks tend to say, don't mess with those black people because they're violent, and things of that nature. Whereas black folks will come kick it, come to the party, come to the barbecue, come hang out with us. And I think that has transcended generations to where we still have this type of cultural, tribal ideology or the way that we work with other folks. And so when we were impacted and introduced to the systemic racism of this country, that rebellion really, it shifted us to a place of violence. And the once communal type, you know, just we kind of kumbaya type feel really did change into a violent atmosphere and a culture of violence. And again, much of that is attributed to the powers that be and the social and economic conditions that we had to grow up in. We were almost forced in many ways to be violent because we had to eat, we had to protect our family, and there was deindustrialization. All of the good jobs that were employing black families that came to California were being shipped overseas. Again, you know, there was mental health facilities were defunded under Reagan, and people were let out in the community, and people were having, you know, crisis became crime. And instead of addressing some of the social strategies that were implemented at that time through a community-driven lens, it was addressed with force and repression and militarization of law enforcement. And so I was really trying to connect the origins of what I learned in Africa to South Central and that rebellious state. But the rebellion and the violence in many ways came through response to systemic violence.
Yeah, exactly. You want to say that? Go ahead, Mandar.
So, put yourself in my shoe. I have had this career at Shell, and I have been welcomed by the community of South Central. 21 people attended my workshop, the first workshop I taught, which you saw. 7 former gang members, 7 LAPD officers, and 7, you can say, regular people like teachers, nurses. So 21 people come to this workshop. They're not forced. That means I must have at least spoken to 200 people. And these 21 people took the risk, right? As my friend Andre said, right? He's a crazy guy. He has come here to teach meditation. And they are with their opposites of sorts. So through this workshop and these workshops that I taught in 2018, 2019, 2020, what I learned is only 2 people invited me to their home, not the people of Indian origin, not the privileged people, but a leader of the Bloods gang and a leader of the MS-13. And they invited me for the best hot chocolate they made for me. I will never forget those experiences. So what it teaches me is, yes, I am a cosmopolitan of sorts, but I also need to be a human. And I think that is the middle ground that we all have to find. Cosmopolitan, tribalism, the middle ground is humanism. We have to find a way to relate to each other as human beings. Because at that level, we are the same. We have the same aspirations, the same human values, love, compassion, mutual respect, and we need to learn how to invoke those values over and over again, just like we brush our teeth every day for dental hygiene. We have to do something to become human every day. That was my learning.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, I'm going to ask one question for the 3 of you, and then we're going to open it up. So I said at the beginning of my talk yesterday that most of the young boys and young men I've been listening to for almost 40 years are boys of color from working class communities. That's not coincidental, given my themes of desire for love and the expression of love in their language. So most of the language that you saw yesterday was young men of color. So that's an interesting thing, right? Why are those particular men, I've been asked this question a lot, why are those particular men the truth tellers to our human desire for connection? Why are they the truth tellers of our human connection, our desire for human connection? So my last question before we open it up is I want you to tell us whatever you want to tell us about how your own desire, channel your 13-year-old self, 14-year-old self, your own desire for connection has shaped your life in any way. I know that's a big question, but channel your 13, 14-year-old self and then talk from that space of how your desire for connection, which is a human desire, has shaped who you are, what you've done, what you have done, what you are doing. I don't care what it is. So why don't we start, Gilbert, why don't we start with you, and we'll go the other way.
Cool. So growing up fatherless, there was always a void. Well, really father and motherless. There was just a real void there when I would see other kids that, had their mother and father in the home, coming to support them at school, coming to support them at T-ball or whatever it may have been. There was a sense of envy that I felt, and that I hadn't learned about the term abandonment. I knew there was always a deep anger and a resentment. Like for a very long time in my life, I said, if I ever met my father, we're gonna fight first, and then we can talk about reconciliation and building a relationship. And I carried that with me so long. There was just so much deep hatred, and it really turned into pain. Of course, it helped fuel a lot of the criminality that I was engaged in at a young age. But growing up, we were us youngsters. So there's data that shows families that have a father in the home tend to have better outcomes. I remember being a kid, and I gravitated to the brothers that didn't have fathers in the home, and we were always getting in trouble. I was suspended multiple times in elementary school, kicked out of high school, and we just would ditch and we would hang out, whereas the men with fathers in the home, they had a level of structure that I didn't necessarily have, though my foster grandma at the time did her best. Yeah. And so growing up with that, it was a lot to navigate. It was a lot to deal with. And then when you look at your surroundings, I pretty much became a product of my environment. Yeah. And so growing up, seeing the older homies getting fast money, fresh cars, they had the finest women, the nice clothes, things of that nature, you want that, and you gravitated. I gravitated towards that, especially growing up with poverty. Hand-me-down clothes. We used to wait for food at the free food lunch in the church, get free food at the parks. Yeah. And so the gang lifestyle at that time was fascinating in the 80s, late 80s and 90s. And it was attractive.
I'm going to interrupt just for 1 second. So where did you find the connection in that period? Where did you find the connection?
With the homies.
You did. And what kind of connection was that for you?
It was ride or die. It was like, I got your back, you got my back. Now, it's a lot of dynamics because I was from one of the largest black gangs, some will argue the largest black gang in Los Angeles. And that's the Rolling 60s. And so there were different factions and different cliques within the clique. My neighborhood came up with the term, you're not a 60 until you kill a 60. And you mentioned my brother Nipsey, rest in peace. I knew him well, he was doing a whole lot of great work in the community, and it kind of validated that term, you're not a 60 till you kill a 60. So even though there was a lot of tension and friction inside of one gang, my clique that I rolled with day to day, like we were tight, we were ride or die, and it would, you know, that's just what it was.
Yeah.
We got into trouble, we got into stuff, we got out of stuff. We did a lot of stuff together, and though it wasn't pro-social, healthy behavior, it's just what it was at the time. That's what we knew.
Yeah.
That's what we saw, and that's what we dealt with.
Yeah, okay.
Our
So
tribe.
thank you very much, Gilbert, for sharing. Rock, I'm going to slightly tweak my question. So I want to know about I want you to channel your 13, 14-year-old self. I want you to think about your desire for connection, but I also want you to share a story, if you can think of one on the spot, of a connection that allowed you to so-called see the light, right? And what that, right? And what that connection was about for you. You understand what I'm asking? So something that brought you out of the sort of what I would call a more problematic connection, right? Because it was about doing bad things or whatever. And I'm interested in the connection that has driven you, that's gotten you to love yourself.
Right, so I'm gonna say I don't think I ever kind of like had an absence of time where I didn't kind of like feel that I didn't love myself. And I don't think people kind of like out there in the society that's been a part of gangs, cliques, or tribes, or the community is that. Actually, it's because they love where they come from. And that's usually where the connection come from. So in working with like a lot of the individuals that's gang members or had a potential, or we call like, you know, at risk. We don't change that term to being like at potential, right? So it's just like a juncture. If they don't get an opportunity to do something different, then this is what it might be. And that's because, you know, that they love the area. And like, you know, Gilbert just spoke on kind of like ride or die. When a person put himself in a position to put his life on the line for a community, that doesn't represent hate. That represent like, you know, love unconditionally to the point to where you want to give your life. So I want folks to kind of like understand that, like a lot of these individuals love where they come from, and where they get that love from, and what's the connection there. I grew up in Harvard Park, right? So we had a pool in our area, and a lot of other communities around us didn't have a pool, right? So when things kind of like formed into the gang stuff, it was people that was on that side of the tracks, they couldn't come to the pool no more. But what it basically was is you could have got your first kiss in that park. I don't know, you know, the elementary school you went to, like, that could have been your first girlfriend. That could have been the connection to that community, you know what I mean? So, you know, there was a time where when you may have did not have food, where your parents or your grandmother would send you to the next door neighbor house and they gave you all some food, you know, that could have been your connection to that community. Like, you know, the street I grew up on, 59th and Dinker, I love that block a whole lot, right? You know, even though everything that was happening in the park, because my grandmother, like, you know, she bought her house there, you know. But the thing was the block parties, you know, I remember that. I remember the community being like real close, and we looked forward to those things as kids. You know, we always look forward to kind of like, you know, to have a party or something like that. And that was a connection. So it just wasn't kids, it was the community involved, you know what I mean? And it was like, and everybody knew everybody, you know what I mean? So that was like the connection. And then when that became threatened, what that threat looked like, as I think Gilbert pointed out, as being a product of the community. You know what I'm saying? So when somebody was from somebody somewhere else coming in to pose some type of threat or danger, we stood up for that. And that led to, you know, individuals being classified, rebels, gangs, et cetera. And this is how some of these things formed. But I think a lot of it was based on the love for the area in which they was kind of like raised. I'm gonna say transitioning out as things kind of like, once you started seeing things more than what it was for, it wasn't just sport and play, because we started to lose people, a lot of people. So there was a time that when you expected somebody to probably pass in the family, it was your great uncle, your grandmother, or somebody like that, like somebody who didn't live their life. But, you know, it got to the point where now mothers was concerned is that if their 16-year-old kid or a 14-year-old child went to school, they might not return back home. That started to become a reality. So we have you know, not just in South Central LA, but all over the country, we have like elderly folks outliving our youth, and these is kids getting gunned down like in the street. That is the biggest threat. That's the biggest like concern right now. Is my son gonna make it? Especially with women who have sons in South Central LA who are black, et cetera. You know, brown folks too. It's like, is my son gonna make it through? You know what I mean? Because of the community conflict. So that's an issue. So that's what we kind of like work the curve. But I think for me, it's like it's the situation where, you know what I'm saying, I had to wind up going to the system. and inside the system having an experience, like seeing something different, you know, as we talk about Bloods and Crips or whatever have you, like inside there, you know, you kind of forced into a race-like type of situation, right? So it's times where, you know, we talking about South Central LA, there's more Crips there than Bloods, and I grew up on the red side, you know, again, at Harvard Park, right? So going inside the system, there was some times where I was on the yard where it may have been 3 Bloods and like 60 Crips, you know what I'm saying? So this wasn't no time to be playing the red and blue game when the opposition now is on a race thing, like they forced that. That's not even what you choose. I didn't grow up like that. Like, you know, we grew up, we was fighting each other. So I didn't understand getting into it with the Hispanics. I didn't understand getting into it with the whites. Like in my community, that didn't exist. Yeah. So inside here was a different get down. So individuals that I was opposed to yesterday that I thought that was totally against me, situations is happening. They running to put their life on the line to secure mine. Yeah. Individuals I thought they're supposed to have been enemies, and then kind of like vice versa. So what that did was like forge certain type of bonds, and for me it was like it's certain things that I couldn't go back to after realizing like this. So the love became bigger than just for me and my community, but almost like how somebody spoke to yesterday, that race is not necessarily a tribe, but in that situation, they made race a tribe. So I started having more respect and love for this, like not against nobody else, but for this. So my appreciation for that kind of led to what is called, like, you know, we study and get knowledge. And I learned that, you know, some of the things that we did to other people that looked like us was, you know, self-hate. And I think Nipsey made a good quote when he said, when you out there and you active, you're not looking for the person that's not active. You're looking for the person that's like you. You know what I'm saying? That's the one you want to get because you know who you are. So that's like self-hate right there. And I had to realize that that's 100% true. We pass people up that's not as active, but the one that poses a threat like we do, that's kind of like who you're looking for, but that's self-hate. So getting knowledge of self and then being able to extend that to people that look just like me as an extension, it was like, okay, now I'm on a pathway to where I'm at, and I'm in this, but along that pathway, it's like there's levels to growth, there's levels to development, there's levels to understanding. Where I'm at now, 100% this, but I'm a humanitarian, you know what I'm saying? I love people, like straight up. Like, so if I hear like, hey, a kid got ran over by a car, I'm not saying, was that a black kid, a Mexican kid, or a white kid? Hey, that's a kid. That's a sensitive appeal right there to the humanity itself. So that's what my knowledge then took me, and that's why I done transitioned out to now to where it's about finding resources for people and bringing people out of this condition because of the main situation for a lot of us that is in like situations of violence, etc. Those are like byproducts of the root cause, which is like poverty. And that's what we kind of like working to kind of like pull people up out of their economic pitfall to put them on a pathway to where they don't have the needs or they're not without, right? And we can do better. So that's primarily where I'm at.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, yeah, we got to wrap it up, Roger. Okay. Mandar, do you want to just say a few thing, and then I'm going to open it up to questions. Oh, do we have time? We don't have enough time. The breakout sessions. Okay, you want to just say something?
Yeah, just one thing that when I was the 13, 14-year-old, what I remember is I used to read the Hardy Boys. I used to watch Superman, Spider-Man, and I always wanted to meet Frank and Joe Hardy. So that was my ambition, is solve mysteries, meet people. And I was always in many groups. I was never part of only one group. I was part of many groups. And somehow this became a virus for me. Like I was at Shell, but I was meeting with the janitors, I was meeting with the security guards, because that is where true humanity lives for me. So when you go in these big structures, you think that the executive vice president or the vice president is a happy guy because he makes a big paycheck. Actually, it's the other way around. The real people that you meet are the real people who, you know, are on in the oil industry, roughnecks. And second experience that I have is, you know, we don't have a choice how our father or mother or parents, grandparents are, do we? We don't have a choice. So we all have some kind of trauma. and it is based on a story that we have been told. So we now have to learn that, hey, there are multiple sides to a story. There is not just one story. Let's say a father and a mother are having a conflict, but you are only exposed to one side of the story. There is another side of the story that might have kept the father away from you. But that story you may not have ever been told. So as we grow, we have to also develop some compassion for whatever decisions we make or others make for us. If we start blaming, if we become, self-guilty, self-blame, blame others, make other people guilty, we are not enjoying our human life. So the only question we should ask is, am I happy today? Am I contented today? And what can I do to be contented today?
Okay, we should thank you very much. Thank you, everybody.